across this old meme that circulates, and it's supposedly an anthropologist. I don't know how true it is, but they talk about when we see the start of civilization. When do we recognize the civilization has begun? And what they point to is that when looking at different, skeletons or whatever else, they see mended bones. And it's that transition from seeing mended bones, which you never saw before, because in the wild, if we're injured, there's no recuperating, there's no surviving. But civilization begun when people started caring for one another, when people started tending to the sick, caring for the injured, caring for the hurt, caring for those who might not have that same access or ability to care for themselves and to fully protect and ensure their life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, as promised to all of us within this nation, and certainly should be the standard abroad as well. And so today we're recommitting ourselves to that. We're recommitting ourselves to the protection of our most vulnerable populations. We're recommitting ourselves to the protection of our students, our teachers, all those who for too long we've asked far too much of. We have a lot of K through 12 educators here, and I want to say thank you. Thank every single one of you for showing up and serving our students, for empowering them, for being their therapist when they need it, for being a parent if that person is not present in their life, for being an educator, for being everything. We ask far too much of y'all, and y'all do it without remorse, without question. And so thank you all. So I won't stand on stage too much longer before, but the principle of this march is a march against fear. It's a march against violence, it's a march against terror, it's a march against domestic terrorism. It's a response, a community-wide response, and hopefully a catalyst following and in the aftermath of all these recent acts of gun violence that we've seen proliferate our nation for the last 20 some odd years. Attacks that have impacted communities across our nation from sea to sea. Attacked all sorts of different people, specifically our most vulnerable and minoritized groups. And so today we're standing against fear because we understand this violence to be domestic terrorism. Its hope is to stoke fear. Its hope is to stoke a fear that creates stagnation, that creates inaction, for fear of what recourse might be taken. But instead, what we're going to do is march, and we're going to stand together, and we're going to keep having the necessary conversations, to keep doing the hard work of being together, and to keep demonstrating the grace and humility that this country will need in order to fully realize its full potential. So I thank all of y'all for being here. I thank you all for speaking, for taking part in the march, for placing these flowers here. We carry these spirits with us. We inherit these hopes. We inherit these dreams. We inherit the responsibility of realizing the potential of all those who cannot realize it for themselves due to senseless acts of terror. And so that's our charge. That's what we do moving forward. That's what we commit ourselves in this space and moment. So thank you. I'll get off the stage. We have people who are far, far more eloquent than me coming up, getting ready to speak here. So I appreciate all of you. We at the NAACP are always here. We're over at the MIMS house, 330 High Street. Please come by, stop in, ask a question, talk about programs, collaborations, seek resources. We're here for any resource that our community needs to the best of our ability. So thank you all, take good care, and please enjoy the rest of our speaker lineup for this evening.
Can you hear me? How's that sound? Can you hear me? Yes. Thank you all for joining with us in courage and in strength to stand up against fear and negativity. My name is Beatrice BeeBee Head. I'm a 70-year-old gun violence survivor. Of January 1st, 1990 was a Super Day. I received a phone call from an emotionally distraught youngest son. My son was 18 years old at the time, trying to call me and tell me that his older brother had accidentally shot himself at his apartment. I couldn't wrap my mind around the words. It felt like falling down an elevator shaft, and there was no ability to stop it. Over the course of that horrible evening in 1993, I learned that my son Donovan had recently purchased a .357 Magnum. I hadn't even been aware of it. He had his own apartment. I was told that he was playing with his gun, putting the clip on and taking it off. What he didn't realize as an untrained novice gun owner, you should never play with a gun. It's not a toy. I was told that even when the clip is removed, a bullet can lodge in the chamber. A gun should always be treated as if it's loaded. Donovan took what he thought was an unloaded gun and pretended to inhale the barrel of the gun. My son Donovan Rubio was 22 years old at the time of his death. I had just celebrated my 41st birthday. I have survived the last 29 years without my son. He would be 51 years old if he had lived. His son, who was born 7 months to the day after his death, never got to know his father. The journey to survivor has been difficult and steep. With the support of my family, La Familia, that includes good friends, counseling, medication, and more therapy, and the grace of God, I stand here today, a survivor. I ask that each one of us do whatever we can to help stop the continued plague of gun violence. Lift your voices, be loud. Lift your feet, march forward. On behalf of the survivors, the parents, the siblings, the spouses, grandparents, aunts and uncles, cousins, friends, neighbors, teachers, classmates, medical personnel, and all of us, I pray we commit to moving us toward becoming the beloved community. We can do it. Sí se puede.
That was very powerful. Thank you. Hello, everybody. My name is Thomas Hiura. I'm a rapper, which means I'm kind of used to urging people to feel free to come closer if they want to, even though I know you might be hiding in the shade. And I'm also a scholar of education, and I've lived in Eugene for about 22 of my 28 years. And I could not be more in love with a place, and your presence today indicates why. I was invited to speak in part because I attended a concert at the Wow Hall in January, where I was the closest non-injured witness to an active shooter. I always tell people that from the bike rack where I was standing on Lincoln Street, I could see the shooter firing towards the back door. Because I was standing on roughly the same sidewalk as the shooter, I could not see around the corner where his bullets were landing. I prayed in that moment that he was merely shooting at a wall, shooting at a squirrel, rather than towards the small crowd that he injured and traumatized. You know, I'm an open book if you come talk with me, but I don't have a whole lot more to say about that situation except that I'm so proud of how the Wow Hall and the performing arts community responded to that tragedy. Afterwards, I joined the volunteer staff, where we had a sold-out hip-hop show 2 nights ago on Friday and a successful cancer benefit show last night. The community persisted, held healing events, and deepened its commitment to community safety. And I'm very proud of one other thing, too. I graduated from North Eugene in 2012 as ASP president, and that means that this year I've co-led a 10-year reunion committee that just put our deposit down on a venue, and we'll be holding our reunion at the Wow Hall. We even have a Zoom meeting at 1:30, so hopefully I don't have to leave early. Like many of you, I'm sure, I'm not interested in a culture war. I'm not interested in driving a wedge further between communities who come from different places of experience with firearms. I want us to see each other more, not less. But I think every living generation of Americans, certainly my own and the younger folks than me, were born into the driving wedge itself, which is the complete normalization of an overwhelming proliferation of handguns, rifles, and semi-automatic tools of killing and carnage. It was a little before my time, but we had a global culture war that was essentially a macro-scale arms race. It was called the Cold War, and the devastating impacts of that tension with the Soviet Union obviously still has demonstrable impacts on our geopolitics today. You know, I'm personally not saying that a firearm has never been discharged for a noble or justifiable reason. It certainly does happen, in my view, under the current conditions of the world. But I want to speak to the conditions that allow young, impressionable, predominantly male, frequently racially privileged people to believe gun ownership makes them tough. A gun doesn't imbue toughness into a human being. It just doesn't. To quote the rally cry, it ain't that cool. Too often it compensates for something. You know what does make you tough? Empathy makes you tough. Perseverance for justice makes you tough. Being here when it's going to be 92 degrees makes you tough and maybe a little crispy. Helping everyone in your community have access to food is tough. Universal health care is apparently tough. Setting boundaries with your friends makes you tough. Building inclusive school communities, that's tough. And we are time and time encouraged to view acts of violence as the random actions of individuals. But in a world that does not celebrate gratuitous violence, I don't believe that a desperate individual or an individual experiencing a health crisis is nearly as likely to join up with the violence that's so omnipresent around them. You know, this might be a little controversial, but I actually don't believe in bad people. All people are flawed and beautiful. To quote the Minnesota-based spoken word and hip-hop artist Guante, I don't believe in nice guys, good guys, heroes, or allies. I only believe in actions. In fact, every interaction we have is an opportunity to deconstruct the tongue we've been taught to speak fluently. We've been told so many times the only thing that stops a good guy with a gun, a bad guy with a gun, is a good guy with a gun. It sort of reminds me of that movie Idiocracy, where the people of a future dystopia only consider one solution for rehabilitating their ecology, even though it's persistently damaged the fields and crops. Brondo, which is a satirical stand-in for Gatorade, they say, it's got what plants crave, it's got electrolytes. Meanwhile, every single farm, every plant is dead because of the myopic focus on a single fake solution that was marketed vociferously with limitless money and power. It's funny how much a slapstick comedy can reveal about our culture. More guns is somehow always the solution from the NRA, and they expect us not to believe it has anything to do with enriching their weapons manufacturing friends. But I submit to you today that we embrace truth, knowledge, and a desire to understand these issues on a deep level. We can't just boogeyman the so-called bad guys with guns, treating them as lone actors or isolated incidents to be imprisoned and removed from society. They need to be seen as an obvious component of an observable, measurable public health crisis that must be studied and intervened in, all the while protecting our most marginalized communities from harm and bias in our current infrastructure of public safety. We've been told so many times by folks like NRA CEO Wayne LaPierre that the only thing that stops a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun. And like so many of the teachers and mothers here, I'm more interested in the circumstances that lead to someone becoming that misnomer, that bad person with a weapon. And I will say this, and I hope you remember it. The only thing that stops someone from becoming a bad guy with a gun is a community with a safety net.
Hello, everybody. Can everyone hear me? My name is Amelia Sides. I'm an incoming freshman at South Eugene High School. And I'm here to fight alongside all of you to show the government that we are done pretending like guns aren't still killing people. This week has reminded us more than ever that we are living in a country where guns have more rights than women. The overturning of Roe v. Wade 2 days ago made it abundantly clear that our government does not care about the lives of children, teens, and women. They just want to be in control. I want to spotlight the fact that these laws, made by a majority of old, straight, white, Christian men, disproportionately impacts Black and Indigenous people, women, LGBTQIA+ members, and school children. The Pulse nightclub shooting was a hate crime against people for just loving who they love. The Buffalo shooting was only a couple weeks ago, killing innocent shoppers just because they were black. Domestic violence happens against women daily, leaving women scarred and shielded, if not dead. Kids every day fear about just walking into a school classroom because of the environment the government has created. I feel as if the adults in charge do not care about us. They just want control. Let's look at the statistics. 62% of the deaths by gun violence in the U.S. are suffered by African Americans. Gun safety is racial justice. Introducing a gun into a domestic violence situation increases the chance of homicide by 500%. Gun safety is justice for women and non-binary people. Nearly 1 in 5 hate crimes are motivated by anti-LGBTQIA+ bias. Gun safety is justice for LGBTQIA+ people. According to Joe Biden, over the last 2 decades, more school-aged children have died from guns than on-duty police officers and active-duty military combined. I am 13 years old, which means I am not supposed to die anytime soon. Yet, what if I were to die? It probably wouldn't be from a car crash, even though I ride in a car every single day. I suffer from asthma along with millions of others, yet it probably wouldn't be from an asthma attack. It wouldn't be from COVID-19, despite millions dying from the pandemic that shut down everything for 2 years. No, it wouldn't be from any of those. I would be most likely to die from a gun. Yes, that's right. The most likely way for a 13-year-old teenager to die is from an incident with a firearm. Whether it's a suicide, a homicide by a stranger or loved one, a school shooting, or even an accident, the most likely way for me to die is from a gun. Gun safety is justice for children. Gun and firearm-related deaths are the leading cause of deaths for children and teen, killing over 45,000 kids just in the 2000s, according to the CDC. 45,000 kids. Let me repeat, 45,000 kids. I do not think I will die, but that doesn't stop my fear and worry. Nelson Mandela, the anti-apartheid and anti-racist activist from South Africa, said, "I learned that courage was not the absence of fear, but the triumph over it. The brave man is not he who does not feel afraid, but he who conquers that fear." I want to conquer my fear. I want to be brave. I do not want to be afraid anymore. The thing is, I don't know how. With laws like the ones we have in place currently, and the media cycle of making a big deal with gun laws and shootings for a while and nothing ever happening, I don't know how to not feel scared anymore. I think that's why I'm here today, speaking to all of you. That's my way to deal with fear, to fight racism, homophobia, and misogyny, and try to make a difference, to try to change the laws so Black people, Native Americans, LGBTQIA+ people, and women, and people who identify across all these groups can feel dignity, safety in their homes, schools, and communities. So again, thank you all for coming, for fighting for us, for ourselves, for loved ones, and even strangers, so none of us have to be scared anymore. Thank you. We're now going to have Piper Everett speaking.
Okay, I'll just hold it. Hello, I'm Piper. I'm a local activist pushing for gun reform, and I feel I need to tell you about how gun laws in America are affecting me and my friends. Again, thank you for coming out today in the heat. It's a lot of work, and you guys are amazing, so thank you all. I'm going into high school, and I have 4 more years until I can vote, but the adults can. Please, please commit to keeping us safe. Our country needs to do something about the ongoing epidemic of gun violence that plagues our schools, places of worship, supermarkets, concerts, and any other public place where mass shootings have happened. In our country, on your 18th birthday, you can buy cough medicine, spray paint, and a deadly gun. Only one of those things have caused over 21,000 deaths and counting so far in 2022. I bet you can guess which one it is. You're required to be at least 21 to adopt a child. But how many children have been killed by an 18-year-old who legally purchased a gun? Too many. People make bad decisions that usually only affect themselves and don't result in hundreds of deaths. The difference is a gun. I have to fear for my life and the lives of my friends every day I go to school. I wonder where the next shooting will be. I console my mother as she cries over the last lives. Must she have to worry about the safety of her daughter as she sends me to school? When I go out into public, I wonder if I'll have to duck to the ground if I hear a shot ring out. As long as I've been in school, mass shootings have always been a risk. I started learning how to hide from a bad guy with a gun since I was in kindergarten. That should not have to be on the curriculum. Obviously, drills are not the solution. Laws are. When will we get a backbone and stand up to the gun lobby? Do kids like me, children, have to protest to keep themselves from getting shot and see their siblings or friends get murdered? How many more of us need to die before the adults decide to reform laws? If you can regulate cough syrup, then regulating guns shouldn't be that hard. Nobody is trying to take away your Second Amendment right. We simply want to make sure that when guns are purchased, there are actions taken to keep all parties safe. The hypocrisy is startling. We don't want to take away all your guns, but for heaven's sakes, you don't need an AK-47 to kill a moose, let alone any other animal. People in America should not have common access to weapons of war. Over 150 countries can create a treaty to ban landmines. Surely, our one country can make laws limiting civilian access to military weapons. To me, this is common sense. Thankfully, Congress has just passed a law to prevent gun violence, but it is not enough. There's more that must be done to truly keep us safe. For too long, politics have gotten in the way of American lives. There are more bills that could be passed right now on gun reform. But instead, politics is getting in the way of American lives. Politicians are prioritizing money over the people who put them in office. Enough is enough. Senators, our blood is on your hands. It's your move and there's only one right option. Let's make action happen. Thank you all for coming out today. Thank you for marching with us. Let's reform gun laws. Let's make communities safe. And let's make sure that we won't have to come here to, let's make sure we don't have to come here any more times because there's been a shooting. Let's make sure we don't have to remember any more lost lives because there shouldn't have to be any more. This should be enough. We should be enough. Our community, speaking up and saying enough is enough should be enough. So let's tell the politicians we are ready for change and we want to make sure no one else has to die. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Rachel Beckly-Rich, and it's such an honor to be with all these articulate people. I'm so pleased that there's so many people supporting this movement, and also that we have a chance for us survivors to speak up. I'm here today to tell you about how shootings affect individuals and communities. This is my story as a teacher who, by default, became a first responder at the Thurston shooting in 1998 at my school. It was a beautiful sunny morning, and we were holding a special breakfast in the library for seniors men who were receiving honors, or simply just we were celebrating them. And I left with such a feeling of hope and pride in these young men. And a secretary asked me to take a phone call in the nurse's office, because as you probably know, nowadays schools are underfunded, and so she wasn't scheduled to come in until 10. And so the office was empty. It was a nice quiet place. And suddenly one of my colleagues brought in a student that was dripping blood from his arm. And he said, "Please hold his arm, his artery is ruptured. There's a shooting in the cafeteria." And of course my heart pounded, and I was hoping it was like an accident, a single gun, maybe being passed from one person to the next. Within moments, though, approximately a dozen wounded students came rushing in, expecting the nurse to be there. Briefly, I was the only adult in that room. And fortunately, I had had first aid many, many times, and you can call it fortunately, I guess, had also helped in some car accidents. And so I started setting up a triage. I recognized that what kinds of wounds those were. I was assessing wounds, reassuring students, lying through my teeth, doing my best to figure out who was seriously wounded and who was just going to be okay. I put them in the back. And I started tearing up sheets for bandages and finding brand new clean plastic garbage bags to use for compression. And I called around to my colleagues. I called out to ask for help because I was in an alcove and people didn't realize at first what was happening. The cafeteria was a separate room, and so not everyone knew what had happened. All this proceeded. I won't talk about my students' wounds because that's a private matter. But a medic asked me to wheel the most gravely wounded student to the cafeteria. So I put her onto an office chair. There were wounded students lying everywhere if they had not already been taken by ambulance. And by the way, I'm telling you the cleaned up version. I saw Ben Walker, our sweet, kind office assistant who brought classrooms messages. He was lying dead at the far door. And at my feet lay my uncle's nephew that I had so often babysat and had driven all the way to the Dalles to hold as soon as he was born, and with whom my children had celebrated Easter and Christmas. Michael Nicolason. I wanted to hold him like I had after he was born. Yet the living were in greater need. So I pulled myself together and pretended I didn't know who he was. I covered him with a coat and got to work on the wounded. There were 25 that day. Rightly so, we honor the dead. We hold funerals. We put up their beautiful pictures and talk about their hopes and dreams. And the journalists tally up the scores of the dead. But you might not see in the news anything less than the count of 4. 4 is what it takes to count as a mass shooting. You might not see stories about 3 or 2 or 1 or someone whose hand was blown off. You probably will never see the stories of the wounded. For every dead person, there's usually a dozen with lifelong injuries or trauma or their own stories to tell. The 2017 Las Vegas shooting killed 58, but also wounded 527. That's 527 with their lives changed and their families' lives changed. Those individuals required open heart surgery, internal organ repair, tissue and bone reconstruction, plastic surgery for shattered faces, etc., etc., etc. Today's high-velocity guns tell a different story than in the old cowboy movies. An AR-15 doesn't just leave the kind of wound where you simply dig out a bullet with a knife and the person walks away with nothing but a limp. No. Today's high-velocity guns shatter multiple bones and organs with a single bullet, requiring complex surgeries, sometimes for the rest of someone's life. There are emotional wounds too. I saw community members with no kids in school weeping with sheer grief. For myself, I couldn't stand to do my favorite activities like go to concerts or the country fair for fear of a shooting in a crowd. I can clearly imagine how the people in Buffalo must feel simply going about their daily business like shopping, grocery shopping. Many will be afraid to leave their houses. Such a loss of peace and innocence takes years to heal. How can we stop this madness? Please formally join a gun safety organization like these. Moms Demand Action, March for Our Lives, Ceasefire Oregon, or Gun Owners for Responsible Ownership. Precisely because of people like you joining us, we were able to stand up to the gun lobby and help pass the first major gun legislation in 30 years. The bipartisan Safer Communities Act focuses on red flag laws, mental health services, and closing the boyfriend loop. But we have a long way to go. In many states, it's still easier to buy an AR than a pistol. So please call your legislatures with your concerns and your ideas. They really do literally tally public concerns in different arenas. Also, lock up your family's guns, separate from the ammunition, in a real safe, not in a shoebox on the closet shelf, not in a drawer. Above all, if you see something, say something. Is your friend or family member suicidal? That's the major cause of gun death. If so, talk to them. Take them to a counselor or give them the number of a suicide hotline. Then tell their family or friends. And if it's safe, have those people take away their guns when they're not there. We had to do that for a friend one time, and he was thankful that we did. Next, is there a gun at your school or someone is making threats at work? Tell your principal or your boss or police. Absolutely check back to see if anybody followed through. At Thurston, the ball was dropped over and over and over. If they didn't do anything, look it up on the internet and call the FBI. I'm not kidding. Just do it. Don't assume anybody else did. Only together can we stop gun violence.
I'm just going to get right into it. Can everyone hear me okay? Awesome. I want to begin by giving some context to things I'm about to say by introducing myself to you formally. My name is Kennah Loper. I was born and raised right here locally in Springfield, graduated from Thurston High School. I now attend the University of Oregon with a major in crime, law, and society and a minor in legal studies. I'm also a board member with the Community Alliance of Lane County, an organization with a mission to educate and organize for peace, human dignity, racial, social, and economic justice. A combination of my personal life experiences, which in part inspired my educational path and activism work, is why I'm speaking with you today. As someone who enjoys studying sociology, I'm very interested in intersecting information and patterns. Some of the intersections I want to discuss today is the Black community, gun violence, and criminalization. Gun homicides, assaults, and police shootings are disproportionately prevalent in historically underfunded neighborhoods and cities. This lack of funding intensifies our country's long-standing racial inequities. Due to a combination of racist real estate policies and practices, such as redlining, restrictive covenants, more covert racism and policy that followed from the 1930s to the 1970s, and differing opinions on segregation, these same underfunded cities, lacking resources for people to be able to thrive, are also predominantly Black. When it comes to owning homes, receiving a high-quality education, being subject to police interaction, having access to outdoor activities, and even experiencing gun violence, Black people were and are systemically ostracized. Us Americans have a 25% higher chance of being murdered by gun violence than people in other high-income countries. Now, there's one statistic that I want to throw at you that actually surprised me. I want you to think of the scariest neighborhood that you can. Somewhere unsafe to walk alone at night. Somewhere where you can't trust anyone. Somewhere where there's a bunch of abandoned buildings. Somewhere plagued by violence. You might think of somewhere in Portland, somewhere in Chicago, Detroit, Compton. I'd like to share an excerpt from There's No Such Thing as a Dangerous Neighborhood by Stephen Lurie, a piece I read in a class called Deviance, Crime, and Control. Dispelling the notion of dangerous neighborhoods, extensive research on geographic concentration has consistently found that around half of all crime complaints or incidents of gun violence concentrated at about 5% of street segments or blocks in a given city. Moving past violent communities, sophisticated analysis of social networks have demonstrated that homicides and shootings are strongly condensed within small social networks within cities, and that there are even further concentration of violence within these social networks. For example, in Chicago, a city often used in the media and elsewhere as an example of the worst American urban violence, researchers found that a social network with only 6% of the city's population accounted for 70% of non-fatal gunshot victimizations. Violent crime isn't waiting to happen on any given block of a poorer neighborhood, nor is it likely to arise from just anyone who happens to live there. Quote from Stephen Lurie. Now that was a long quote, but one thing is important to take from that. Gun violence in the Black community and in all of our communities is not everywhere. Therefore, the majority don't deserve to be criminalized based on internalized racism and not fact. We must focus on the small parts of the population committing these acts of violence, the policy or lack of thereof that makes it easier to acquire weapons, identify patterns within these small populations, and avoid criminalizing everyone else. It's time to focus on the real issues, the prevalence of guns, unaffordable physical and mental health care, inequitable education, and just general inequality. I can't tell you what the solution to the things are that I just mentioned, but I can tell you what it is not. The solution is not sending more police to our schools. A study conducted by the Department of Education revealed 92,000 arrests in the 2011-2012 school year, and schools with SROs had nearly 5 times the arrest rate of non-SRO schools, even after controlling for student demographics like race and income. This comes from Alex Vital's book called The End of Policing. Ubiquitous punitive conditions that are prevalent in the American school system catapult our children into the criminal justice system for things like misbehaving in class. Not to mention the disproportionality of suspensions and school-related arrests when it comes to BIPOC and special needs children. We need not criminalize the actions of our children. We must protect them from real crime. No child deserves to go to school with the fear that gun violence might happen.
What else is it not? The solution is not broken windows policy, targeting low-level public order crimes, such as loitering or graffiti. It is not arming our teachers. That's just preposterous. When is enough enough? How many devastating incidents did there have to be for people to see the problem with gun violence, to be willing to make it harder to own a killing machine for the sake of our children? When will we ban assault weapons designed to take away life quicker and more efficiently? When will we have more extensive background checks? When will we stop refusing to be more open to flexibility with a document drafted over 200 years ago by old racist white men? Please, don't stop fighting for stricter gun laws, for less police presence, funding education, mental health services, and thinking about systemic reform. We can fight for a better, safer, equitable country, and we can win. Now, that was supposed to be the end of my speech today, but this morning I was inspired by somebody. I was inspired by an 8-year-old by the name of Nyah, and I would just like to give her the opportunity to introduce herself. I was shocked when I spoke to Nyah this morning, and an 8-year-old articulated an entire plan for what she will do if a man with a gun is at her school. We should not have to teach our children this. You can say hi and say whatever you want.
Hi, I'm Nyah, and I have a plan. If there was a school shooting, then I would go to my friend's house. If we were outside and we were playing, I would go outside and I would run to my friend's house. And if we're inside, I hide, or I run, or I help my teacher. And we need to stop killing kids like me. And we need to stop.
Thank you.
My name is Kyle Rodriguez-Hudson. I am the Executive Director of Transponder. And when I got the call to talk today, I knew exactly what I wanted to say. And then the news on Friday regarding the changes of reproductive care made me realize we've gone back 50 years like that. And so I thought about making this a personal situation and giving you a timeline. 1999, Columbine. I was in high school. I remember seeing the bodies, some of them covered in blood, running for safety. These individuals were around my age, but I didn't realize that was the beginning, so unfortunately not an end. Virginia Tech, fast forward, 2007, college. I'm in college now. History repeating itself just some few years later. Bodies leaving a school covered in blood. We don't realize things start getting closer and closer the moment it hits home. Fort Hood, military base. A partner's family member was gunned down. 2009. As a therapist, they teach you about vicarious trauma. So I will read you to the definition of it. Vicarious trauma is a process of change resulting from empathetic engagement with trauma survivors. It happened in 9/11, and it happened with George Floyd's murder. Sandy Hook, 2012. My son was 1, and that's when it hit home. All I could think of was my babies. Every last of them were my babies. And I couldn't help but wanting to leave work and hug him. 2016, Pulse, 49 queer POC folks murdered. And then it hit home again. Chicago, 2017, where I was born and raised. My 22-year-old cousin was walking to the train station and gunned down. 2022, Texas. My son is now 11. And once again, I'm saying, my babies. My babies. Why does it only happen, or it becomes a concern when it hits home? Why does the government tell us what we can do with our bodies, but yet somehow we can keep AK-47s? When will it be safe to go to your place of worship? When would it be safe to go to the grocery store? When will it be safe to be black, POC, trans? When will it be safe to kiss your babies goodbye when you drop them off at school and know they will be back in your arms at the end of the day? When will it be safe to just exist and not have to worry that you will be looking at a barrel of a gun at any moment in time? There is a difference between a purpose and a passion. A passion is easy. A purpose isn't. Today and every day, we need to fight for our purpose. We need to fight for our existence. We need to fight for our babies. Tomorrow is never promised, so I leave you with this. We will continue to have struggles. We will continue to have joy. Find your joy today. Find your purpose. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? All right now. Oh, my goodness. I'm so excited to be here. My name is Jennifer Broadous-Scurlock, and I am a teacher here in Eugene School District 4J. I also serve on the State Board of Education as a teacher who's a voting member on the State Board of Education, and I also serve as an NEA director, so I represent over 40,000 educators here in the state of Oregon. Yes, so thank you. Yes, yes, yes. I'm so excited to be here, but I have to say something really quick. When I hear students sharing stories, these young folks talking about things and doing it with eloquently and with strength and with purpose, and that fervor is there, I am inspired and blessed today. And I want to thank all of the presenters who have shared thus far, because their testimonies are powerful. Let's give them a hand. Yes. Yes, yes. So I'm just going to speak to you briefly. Again, my name is Jennifer Broadous-Scurlock, and it's an honor and a privilege to be here with you today. I want to make it clear that today, as I come here, I stand on the shoulders of giants. I stand on the shoulders of my father, Leon Broadous Jr., who was the first black brakeman to be hired here to work for Southern Pacific Railroad. And he endured racism in his life, and he's continued to fight against racism. But I stand on his shoulders today, and I'm so grateful. I stand on the shoulders of a magnificent woman by the name of Ernestine Stubbs Broadous. She was my mother, and my mother grew up here in Eugene when it was still segregated, where little black girls were discouraged to dream and to think beyond being a housewife or being a maid for someone. And that was promoted in what was formerly known as Eugene High School, which is now known as South Eugene High School. The dreams of people of color were smushed here in this land, in this community. I share this with you because there's an intersection of racism and gun violence that must be addressed here in this moment as we are engaging in courageous conversations. And it must be said, it's not just the blood of George Floyd. It's not just the blood of those who have gone before us unjustly as we watch them being persecuted and murdered in front of our eyes. We are living in a time and place where my students share their stories. And their stories are scary, and I'll tell you why. They are being intimidated as they go to the store, as they go to, let's say, McDonald's, a fast food restaurant, because of the color of their skin. And it's taken on a different type of tone, where the racism that my students are enduring is unapologetic. Let me repeat that again. It's unapologetic. And I wanted to come here today to share a couple of stories from my babies, my students, as they opened up in class or in their writing to say, hey, Mrs. Scurlock, this is what I've had to go through just on a day-to-day basis. One of my precious students, I'm going to call her M for today, to protect her name. She talked about going to the Churchill store right down the street from the school I teach. And she said she went and got her groceries, food, and for lunch, and she was there with her friends. And she said these two white men walked into the store after she had already paid, and she was talking to the clerk there, the worker there, and the guy saw her, one of the men saw her, and he started singing the N-word to her as she's standing there with her food waiting for her friends during lunchtime. I didn't know this story, but in class I provide spaces for kids to share what's really going on in your life. And she said she got scared because she knew what it meant, that she was in danger simply because of the color of her skin. And this was not long ago. This was within this past school year. And she described her experience. And she said, Mrs. Scurlock, I stood there and I just froze. I didn't know what to do. And she said the clerk, the lady who was working there at the register, she said, I saw her face turn completely white. And we both stared at each other because we were scared. They knew exactly what his point was. To intimidate her, shut her up, make her feel uncomfortable in her own environment so that hopefully she would one day disappear or just be disregarded. He wanted to make it clear that she did not belong. I also had a student share with me about standing in a fast food line, waiting to get food. This kiddo was only about 14 years old. And she said she was standing next to a woman, and then also her husband, what she believes was the woman's husband, was standing next to her. So there was three of them in a straight line. And she said the man looked over at her and said to his wife or partner, said, I don't want you standing next to that. And then he moved his wife away from my brown-skinned baby, this precious little girl. And the girl realized, it took her a minute, but she realized what had just happened. He wanted to make it clear that she did not belong, that she was not welcomed near him or in this community. Let's add that to the gun violence that we have seen happen across our nation. My students sent cards to Robb Elementary School. And I tell you what, as a teacher, as an educator in our community, it is heartbreaking to think that kids have to plan how to escape from a shooter as they are trying to learn about reading, writing, and arithmetic and just wanting to be good global citizens. I have a problem with that. I have the problem with the fact that amazing educators like Kevin Summerfield and Dr. Leah Dunbar and Joey Dunbar and different ones, Gene Chisholm, Casey Tiemann, that we have to plan when an interaction happens and a gun person comes in to kill us. We have to always think to ourselves, okay, am I willing to die today as I protect my students? This is not a joke in the conversations that we have with ourselves. How can I protect my students? Okay, if I die, how can I protect them the most? And we have these conversations in our minds and with one another. And it's heartbreaking because no teacher should have to worry or student should have to worry if they're going to be able to go home to their families. It should not happen in our nation. And I tell you this, I want to encourage you today, As we are all here collectively standing in the gap for our students and for our community, taking a bold stance against gun violence and AK-47s and those type of things that are not necessary to have in our environment, I want to encourage you. Your voice matters. Your legislation, contacting members of Congress, governors, all those things, let me tell you, it makes a difference. It was not by accident that on Friday, gun legislation passed in our nation, all right? It was not by accident. And I want to share this with you briefly. What passed on Friday, y'all, is the Bipartisan Safer Community Act. And it took 30 years. It took 30 years, but here we are making it clear that we're not done with the work that we have set to protect our students, our families, and our communities. And although this goes to improve mental health services for children and families, and it goes to keep our schools and communities safer by improving background checks for buyers under the age of 21, and it goes to create criminal penalties for straw purchases and gun trafficking, and it goes to close the boyfriend loophole to keep guns away from convicted domestic abusers, you and I both know that it has to go farther than this, because we cannot risk having another mass shooting and for our students to ask us, when is the next one going to happen? Are we safe? We cannot let that be their normalcy. It cannot happen on our watch, and it will not happen on our watch. So as you advocate for children that you know and don't know, as you advocate for educators that you know and don't know, and as you stand in the gap for those who are oppressed and do not have a voice, you do it with boldness and be unapologetic, for lives are depending on your work and your advocacy as you stand up against racial injustice and social injustice and gun violence. We do not have time to waste. Yes, we do not have time to waste, and I want to thank you for being here today. We are blessed, continue to be a blessing to those who meet, and let's do this work. Thank you so much.
Hello, can you hear me? Yeah, thank you all for hanging on. I'm the last speaker, and then we'll have a song from the choir after this. My name is Diane Peterson. I'm the local group leader for Eugene Springfield Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense in America. I am grateful to be a part of this incredible event, working alongside a broad coalition of community partners, calling attention to the crisis of gun violence in our country and its deadly intersection with hate and bigotry. I am grateful to the NAACP for bringing us together. I am grateful to our faith leaders for the beautiful ceremony honoring victims of gun violence. I am grateful for everyone who has shared their story and their music here today. And I'm grateful to all of you who are here to raise your voices and call for action to prevent future tragedy. As we conduct this event today in the spirit of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., we grieve that his life was taken by gun violence, and we strive toward his vision of the beloved community. I joined the movement to end gun violence after the shooting in Charleston, South Carolina in 2015, in which 9 black people were shot and killed by a white supremacist while they were praying together at church. That is when I stood up and said, enough. Because that was the moment when I could finally see with complete clarity that the consequence of society's inaction would be the continuation of suffering for innocent people, for more beautiful, irreplaceable lives to be taken, and exponential trauma for everyone connected to every victim. And sadly, we have seen acts of domestic terror continue, motivated by racism, anti-Semitism, anti-LGBTQIA+ sentiment, misogyny, and so many more hateful reasons. The shooting in Charleston is only one example of the deadly intersection of guns and white supremacy. Gun violence and racist acts were central to the very formation of this country. But for me, it was my moment of activation. I started writing a letter to my congresspeople. Then I looked for a group to join, found Moms Demand Action in Eugene, and I've been doing this ever since. Through this work, I've learned a great deal about this uniquely American crisis of gun violence. Too much to fit into a short speech today. What I'd like to use this time to do is to let you know what you can do to prevent gun violence. I know that many are here today because you are ready to take action. So here are some things you can do to get started. Be vocal, because you can be sure that the opposition is. The simple act of speaking matters, so use your voice. Use it in everyday conversation, on social media, writing a letter to the editor, and contacting state and federal lawmakers. Use it on every platform available to you to raise the issue of gun violence, racism, and prejudice. You can also thank your senators and representatives for passing the bipartisan Safer Communities Act, and you can encourage them to do even more. You can join a group. The Eugene Springfield Moms Demand Action Group will hold our next meeting on July 14th at 6 p.m. on Zoom. Please join us. Visit momsdemandaction.org/events. There are many other local groups who do important work and need volunteers, including the NAACP, Springfield Eugene Showing Up for Racial Justice, Planned Parenthood, Community Alliance of Lane County, and so many more. So many opportunities to connect. Find us, talk to us. You can also get involved in campaigns for candidates who support common sense gun laws. Moms Demand Action identifies gun sense candidates at the local, state, and federal level. Gun law reform has become a winning platform. Demand it from every candidate in every position. Check out gunsensevoter.org. You can sign IP17. Find a signature gatherer near you here today. And you can participate in Every Town for Gun Safety Summer Series, where you'll receive one text message a week with a short video and a quick action. The message and action together will take less than 20 minutes of your time. Joining this series is an efficient way for you to have a big impact even when your time to act is tight. You can take out your phone right now and text the word SUMMER to 64433 to sign up. If you own guns, you need to lock them up. Thanks to the passage of Oregon Senate Bill 554, it's now the law. Unsecured firearms too often lead to unintentional shootings of and by children, suicides, and theft for use in crimes, including mass shootings. Ask your friends and family who own guns to make sure they are stored securely. If you are a student and want to join Students Demand Action, text the word STUDENTS to 64433. You can donate to support gun violence prevention activities in Oregon and nationwide. You can also donate to the NAACP and to all of the wonderful organizations doing important work in our community. And you can stay tuned for more action items, because this is what we do. We keep going, no matter what happens in the Supreme Court, because we know that the people are supreme. All of these things have more impact when we do them together. What is needed to put an end to the gun violence crisis is a groundswell of people who speak out not just once, but continue to speak and take action persistently until we meet the goal of keeping our communities safe from gun violence. Please join us. There is so much we are doing and so much more we can do. Let this be your moment of activation. Thank you.